Hey, this is Johnny Kelly from Typo Negative and Patriarchs in Black, and you are watching CMS TV.
I scratch the surface down into your life. I see the signs that we're here for trouble. The hard road in the middle behind. Killing time on
It is CHRIS AKIN Presents, and I, of course, am Chris Akin, and today on the show, one of my favorites, and I gotta admit, probably one of the busiest guys out there. It seems like he's juggling more bands than a juggler in Central Park. You know, he's got everything going on, whether it's IM, whether it's Quiet Riot, or this band that we're going to talk about today, Patriarchs in Black. Brand new release, Visioning, out on July the 19th, and here he is himself, Mr. Johnny Kelly. Johnny, how are you, man?
Hey, how's it going, Chris?
It's good, man. It's good to talk to you. It's good to talk to you about such a great record, man. I'm just going to tell you up front, I love the record. I love the fact, and we'll start here. I love the fact that with Patriarchs in Black, you and Dan are consistently A, putting out music, but B, not sticking yourself into a pigeonhole of sound. You're really exploring a lot of different places. I think that's good for you guys, man, because it doesn't lead you to get stuck into your history. It lets you grow.
Well, I think that's part of the foundation of what Patriarchs in Black is as a project, and the foundation of it is there, they were that real heavy doomy riff oriented songs, and it's really the other people that come in and contribute that really put the different spins on it. Yeah,
right on. Definitely.
Where you have the different vocalists, and now we got guys like Daryl from DMC, and
sure.
They're definitely different than say Carl Agel or Mark Sunshine.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And it's cool to see how bringing in these different people, how they put their own twist on it to make it their own. But ultimately, it seems like even though the band is going into whatever different territory, musically or whatever, it still sounds like Patriarchs in Black, regardless of who is taking part in whatever song.
Right. Well, how much of that do you think is Dan? And I've said this for a zillion years. Dan is, I'll put it this way. If Eddie Van Halen dropped his guitar, people would say it's a creative, innovative riff. But Dan, I don't know anybody in the world that has ever heard a riff Dan has played that isn't like, wow, that's pretty great. But yet Dan doesn't get any credit for it. Do you think that a lot of the reason Patriarchs is so strong is because Dan is such a great riff creator and writer?
that they're his riffs,
right.
That's the foundation of all of it.
Right.
Dan and I work well together, and it seems like what I'm bringing to the table is complementing, Dan's, songwriting, but it's ultimately Dan.
Right on.
And the thing that I'm so impressed with him which sometimes could be a pain in the ass, is that he's constantly coming up with stuff. I have my mailbox is filled with stuff that I haven't had time to get to yet.
Wow.
You know, we're already working on the 4th record.
Okay.
And, you know, like when we first, like when this record was done, we had already started, like, you know, working on the next one. And then when we're, you know, like when we're doing press and stuff, I start getting confused as to what we're talking about.
Right.
And I'm like, wait a minute, wait, that's that record. It's like, we're not talking about the next one. Like when I'll hear the word new record, and I'm like, oh, you mean the one that we're working on now?
Right.
Meanwhile, the other one just came out, you know, less than a year ago.
Right.
And now Visioning is coming out next month. And we'll have something else by 2025 easily.
Right. And that's not even to take into account your other stuff too, whether it's Quiet Riot or I Am or, you know, I mean,
right. Yeah.
That I have to imagine that's very tough for you to find time, not necessarily to find time, but to find enough time to not just throw it together, to keep being creative on your side of it and not just kind of like, because, you know, you could play drum fills all day long and they'll fit, but they may not be the best that you could do. But everything you do in every one of these projects seems to be, you know, thought out and executed well, you know, from a percussion standpoint.
It can be tough. Like the thing, like with working with Patriarchs, I do have the luxury of being able to put more time into the stuff.
Okay. Because
I work on it at home. I have a studio at home and I track, and I'll send Dan stuff like, you know, roughs of like, you know, this is what I'm hearing, kind of, you know, this is where I'm at with the song. What do you think?
Right.
And then he'll say, like, you know, whether he, you know, likes it or if, like, you know, he hears something different or whatever. And then I can go back in and work on it and then, you know, send him something again. And, you know, with I Am, it's a different story. There's a little more pressure there.
Right.
As far as we're on a limited schedule.
Right.
So we make time, say, you know, like what we did, you know, working on, you know, the songs that we have up to this point. We get together for a week and we try to average, you know, we start the morning, you know, walking in the morning to the studio, work on it. You come up with a song and then track the drums by the afternoon.
Right.
And so I have basically that day to come up with the drum track.
Okay.
And you're hoping, I know for me, like I'm hoping, like I'll hear different things in my head, and it's like, you know, I'll apply drums to the song, expecting to hear other things.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the less is more approach is definitely applied for that. And so, you know, I just try to, like, you know, come up with an arrangement, come up with stuff, and basically keep it pretty simple.
Sure.
So that the, you know, like there's a good foundation for whatever's going to be put on that song, whatever layering, you know, different guitar parts, you know, alternate melodies, you know, vocal lines and stuff, you know, just try to keep it simple enough where there's room for that, where the drums wouldn't be over, you know, stepping on it or like, you know, competing to be the focal point in the song.
Right. Do you and this is specifically to you, do you find it harder than most might just because you are, I mean, you play every weekend. I mean, my co-host is Eric Ferentinos, and every other week he's like, yeah, we're going out with Quiet Riot at this place or that place or whatever. And I know I see your posts or Jizzy's posts or whatever online, and here we are at this casino or at this festival. Yeah. You're playing every week. I have to imagine that knowing that you have to travel basically every Thursday to Sunday, it's very difficult to get into a creative groove outside of the music that you're playing every weekend, no?
It's a challenge sometimes to, like, you know, switch gears. And, you know, like there have been times, you know, where I've done, like, I remember posting something. I kept on changing the drum head on my bass drum. Right. But it was a Quiet Riot. I took it off. It was Kill Devil Hill. And then a few days later, it was Hookers and Blow. And, but you do have, I mean, you know, I don't really look at it other than it's, you know, I have to do that.
Sure.
You know, it's not like, you know, whether you're in the mood or, you know, you're not in the mood or, you know, whatever it is, like, you know, you just figure out the logistics and just go and do it. And like, you know, there's been many times where I've, you know, like the first time I got together with IM, literally got picked up from the airport, went to the rehearsal studio from the airport, worked on the song, tracked the song the next day, and then back at the airport going somewhere else. And it's, you know, I try not to really think about it too much and just do it. You know,
right.
That's just part of what I do now, you know,
right.
And you have to switch gears. I don't really sit back and think about it.
I hear you. Is home actually home now, or does it just feel like another place that you're sleeping?
Actually, I've been home now for a few days.
Okay.
Like, I mean, on top of everything else, you know, my mother's been having some health issues, so I've been going up to New York a lot when I've had a lot of downtime.
Right.
So I've been going up there helping my mom and my brother and stuff, you know, like, and so like this week, what did I do this week? Last week I didn't play.
Okay.
We had the weekend off. Like, you know, like the last couple of months, the Quiet Riot schedule has been pretty light. So which is a blessing in the sense that I've been able to, you know, go up to New York a lot.
Sure.
And like this week, last week I went up there and I drove from New Jersey to Dallas with my mom's dogs.
Okay.
So I have her dogs down here, you know, to help, you know, take care of the dogs. Sure. And then tomorrow I'm flying to California. I'm flying to California, and then when I get back from California this weekend, probably Monday, I'm going to drive back to New Jersey to bring my mom's car back to you know, New Jersey.
Right.
And then the next weekend, I'm actually off. So I'll fly home and I'll stay home for a few days. And like this week, I was home for a couple of days. I was able to get into the studio working on a Patriarchs In Black song.
Okay.
You know, one of the new ones. So when the time allows, you know, like I have my studio here in Dallas.
Right.
I go in, I work on some stuff, I bring it home, fly out to work, you know, come back, get into the studio, and you know, like I'll work on the edits and cleaning it up and, like, you know, doing mixing or, you know, stuff like that. I take my laptop with me. I can do it on the plane. I do it in my hotel room.
Sure.
You know, it's a lot of multitasking. And
sure.
I never looked at myself as one that really did well with multitasking.
You obviously do.
Yeah. And it's part of my, you know, like whatever, it's part of my life now. And it's just something that I have to do. And like I said, you know, I don't sit there and think about it.
Sure.
Because if I did, I'd probably get overwhelmed. And but I just do it. You know, it's just what I have to do now. Like, you know, everybody has their, you know, jobs and, you know, like
sure.
the things that they have to do. And most of the time you don't think about it, you just do it. You know,
right.
Like I was in New York, like I've been up in New York a lot, and I was, you know, but when I was there, I'm like, how did I live here for so long and
right.
deal with this? And it's just different when you're in it and you're doing it every day, and you know, you're not thinking about, you know, the challenges and the hardships or whatever. You just, you know, just doing your thing.
Right.
And that's where I'm at with this.
Sure.
With all of this. You know.
Are you more comfortable doing it this way, where everything is, where it keeps you kind of, you know, on the edge, I guess, more or less, because you're always working on something different? Or do you wish that you would find one band, you know, like you had with Type O back in the day? Obviously, Type O was your band. And, you know, and that's what you did, was Type O. Did you like that method better, or do you like this method better, where you're always kind of on the go, but always busy?
Both have its you know, advantages, I think. You know, I love getting the opportunity to play with different people, because that, like, you know, doing that to me, I think, gives me the opportunity to be a better musician, to be a better drummer.
Sure.
like working with one band, and like, and you're working on, you're working to the best of your abilities. It's hard to, for me, it would be like, like I wouldn't be like, oh, I need to like, learn how to play like, whatever, different, different exercises, or like, different type of, like different kind of fill, or, and, I think, like, it's like when you're working within the confines of your own thing, to me, I would get lazy.
Right. Okay. Right on, man.
And like working, working with different people and stuff, it has a different influence on you.
Mm-hmm.
So then you'll approach, I'll approach the drum set a little differently.
Right on.
And, maybe play something, out of my comfort zone.
Sure.
So I find it stimulating and challenging that way, where it's like, I'm always like, switching gears and trying to be, trying to expand on my abilities and to learn from it and to, grow and to be a better drummer.
Sure. When you're creating, I'm curious with this, when you're creating, and you mentioned it, I'll throw some names out here. With Visioning, you worked with a lot of different vocalists,
Yeah.
Carl from COC fame, obviously, and Jason McMaster, who is literally a Swiss Army knife of singers himself, and
he really is, though. Like, he could fill in, right? What didn't he just play with Accept?
Yeah, he played with Accept.
Right?
I think he did Armored Saint. Yeah.
And his own stuff, like, like there's that, all that stuff too that he does. And, but yeah, I mean, and it comes down to it, like, he's a nice guy. Like, I've hung out with him a little bit and stuff. Nice guy, total pro. And, like when you have those situations like that, where you have somebody that has, is a great talent and is a good person and dependable and, professional, that's why he's getting calls like that.
Sure.
And it's cool to, like, it was great. I got to meet him. I hung out with him a bit on the Monsters of Rock cruise this past spring.
Okay.
And like I've heard, Dan has talked about Jason a lot over the years, and like always spoke very highly of him and stuff. So I was looking forward to getting to meet him. And he's a really cool guy, and he's not far from me here. He's in Austin. I'm in Dallas.
Okay.
And we've talked about, like, trying to get together and, making some noise and having some fun. But, life gets in the way of everything. And,
sure.
So it hasn't happened. But, like, it's cool to get the opportunity to play with other people like that. And, like when you're in your own band, it's cool in the sense that you're in your own bubble. Mm-hmm. You're insulated from everything else.
Right.
And, both have its advantages and disadvantages, like with our own bubble, and we were creative, where it was just us and everything was just focused on us.
Right.
And it was focused on us making the best songs that we could.
Right on.
And so that's cool in that way too, where it's like, the only thing that you're thinking about is that box you're in.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to turn this into a typo thing, but I'm just curious, based on what you said here. Was Typo? I mean, I love Typo. Is still probably one of my top 5 bands of all time. I have.
Right on.
You want to talk about somebody that's put 1 million plays on your Spotify right here, man? Because I play this. I still. Life is killing me. I still play probably once a week. I mean, it's just so great, man. But. When you were doing Typo, I mean, there was, as much as the music of Typo is fantastic, there was also the stigma of Typo. You guys were a little more secretive. People didn't, obviously people had their impressions of Peter, but they didn't really know him, and most thought of him as gloomy, where every other person I know has always said he was kind of a jokester type of a person in real life.
Yeah.
Did you find that you guys in that era were trying to live up to the impression that people had of Typo, or did you really just kind of do your thing and let the media run with it any way they wanted to?
Well, yeah, it was like, we were really just doing our own thing, and a lot of the stuff, like, whatever was being said about us, or, however we were being portrayed, like, we didn't really worry about it.
Right.
It was, there wasn't any kind of like say like a uniform that we would put on, or like, all right, we have to be typo negative today, or,
Right.
that's just who we were. And, you could see that, like, in any interview with anybody in the band, like, when they're being interviewed, that's who we were when there wasn't any, record button being pressed or anything. Like, that was us in front of, thousands of people. That was us one-on-one. It didn't really play a factor into, who we were.
Right.
Or what we were doing. Especially creatively, like, like when we were working on records, we didn't, pay attention to anybody, anything. Obviously we weren't following any trends, because we were just literally just doing our own thing, and just, like we'd have a song, and, whatever that song was, and, we were just like putting 100% into making it the best song that we could.
Sure.
Really the only thing that was ever, I guess, like would take a priority, was that whatever we were doing sounded like typo.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well,
you definitely accomplished that.
That was the only. That was really the only thing. Like, once the band found its identity, musically, when we found ourselves, it was like, like this is what we are.
Right.
And anything going forward needed to sound like it was us.
Sure. Do you take any pride in the fact that there are so many bands that take the obvious influence from what you guys did? Bands like the 69 Eyes. I'm just throwing one out there, but there's tons of them that are absolutely 99% influenced by what you guys did. Do you take pride in that?
I'm surprised by it. Like pleasantly surprised, of course. Like anybody that would cite typo negative is like, like having any kind of influence on them. Yeah, that's to me that's cool. Here we were, just guys from Brooklyn. Just trying to we were just making music. It was like when I joined the band, there wasn't even any goals of like trying to be successful of any sort. It was it's like when Peter. Like I knew everybody in the band for years before I joined the band. So it wasn't like I just like, walked in as a stranger and was just like a replacement drummer.
Mm-hmm.
But Peter used to, like, when I used to work at a shop, and I was a mechanic, and, Peter used to come by and hang out with me and my boss. And before I joined the band, Peter was telling me, he was like, look, this isn't that kind of band. We're not gonna tour, like we're not gonna do anything like that. And I said, I don't care. I was like, I love the band. I want to be in the band. Whatever that is, I want to be in it. Right. And so there wasn't any it was like, to me, it was like, it was a local band that had a record deal.
Right on.
That's what it seemed like. Where it was like, like the band had local popularity, like in the region, like, when I first joined the band, we would go and play in like Connecticut, New Jersey and stuff like that. But it wasn't like, like these real, like super long, like, yeah, we're going on the road for, 6 weeks. That didn't happen until months later.
Right. So what, like then, Love You to Death or whatever, right? And
no, this was like
before that?
Like Bloody Kisses. I had joined the band in 93, the fall of 93. Right, Bloody Kisses came out in the summer of 93. I joined in the fall. We didn't go out until the spring of like 94.
Okay.
Where we did our first tour. And I was shocked that we were going on tour. I didn't really, I was like, what do you mean we're going on tour?
Right.
I said, I thought we weren't going on tour. And then it wasn't until like a year later, after Bloody Kisses was released, where people started taking notice of the band, of the record. We had been on tour for like this. It started happening like when we were touring with like Mötley Crüe.
Okay.
and that was in the summer of '94, and
Yeah.
that was a year. Bloody Kisses had been out for a year, and nobody really knew about it.
Right.
We had done a couple of like club tours, like some small stuff, but the band wasn't really gaining any traction.
Right.
And so so then after that, then it started becoming a thing where it was like, all right, now I start thinking about quitting my job and stuff like that. But we to try to get back to like what we were talking about, it was like it was always just us.
Mm-hmm.
And it was especially in that time, it was really unique in its own way.
Right.
And, like to see people, cite that as an influence now, it's pretty cool because you really we didn't have any expectations on a record. It was like, well, this record is going to, we're working on our legacy now. And,
right.
As the record's being written and stuff, it'd be like, well, what are people going to think about this, 25 years from now? Every time that bus stopped, we thought that was the last day of the band.
Nice.
We thought the band was breaking up every time the bus stopped. We were like, that's got to be it. That's it. We're done.
Right.
It ran its course. And so now, it's like, it's 2024 and people are still talking about it. And it's like, they hold the band in high regard. That's, it's surprising to me. It's especially like, the way that we were like, viewing it as it was active.
Right. Well, yeah, the weird thing, and we'll wrap it up here because I know you got other ones to do, but the weird thing
is my last one for today.
Oh, okay. Well, then I won't. But the ironic thing is, I personally think Typo Negative way bigger now than you guys were when you were active. I think, and again, it goes back to the mystique of it. I think a lot of people didn't understand what you guys were, and
yeah, we were always. We were always the square peg trying to fit in a round hole.
Yeah. And some of the tours were kind of odd. You mentioned the Mötley Crüe tour. Yeah. I saw that show at Nautica Stage here in Cleveland. I saw it, and you guys did not fit with those guys at all, but you murdered.
Not at all.
But you murdered you came out and destroyed. And you probably won, 1,000 fans that night that were not familiar.
It wound up like that tour in particular. That's the one that pretty much that put the band on the map.
Okay.
There was like little rumblings and stuff, and like when we would do some club tours before that, there would be some people there, but it wasn't like we were playing basically a lot of places playing dive bars.
Right.
And when that tour, like when our manager told me that we were going on tour with Mötley Crüe, I was like, where's the punchline in this? I was like, I'm a funny guy. I could take a joke. And I was like, I'm not finding the joke here. I was like, we're going to get murdered. Why are we doing this? I was like, well, how does Typo Negative fit with a band like Mötley Crüe?
Right.
And our manager was just like, you got to trust me on this. This is going to be a really good thing for you guys. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, well, I like Mötley Crüe, so it'll be a fun summer. Get to, watch Mötley Crüe every night, watch Tommy Lee play, drums. And I was like, this will be great.
Sure.
And I was like, but as far as like us, like, doing something good for, the band's career or anything, I was like, I think this is like the worst mistake possible. and it wound up like, like for us, it was like we started winning fans over.
Mm-hmm.
And then our manager, it was like, we toured with them for the whole summer. And then the minute the tour ended, we didn't go home. We went back out on our own tour.
Okay.
And, the first show was in Dallas. We played the Basement in Dallas, and made famous by Pantera and stuff like that.
Sure.
And, the Dallas show for Mötley Crüe was one of the better shows on that tour. And So we, like we really didn't think anything of it at the time. We were just like, all right, we tour, we're going out hitting the clubs, and the place was oversold, and there was a line going around the corner from the club of people still trying to get in after it was already sold out. And that was the start of it. Like our manager, and our booking agent had us go back to like all these places that we played supporting Mötley Crüe. We followed it up by doing our own club shows, and that's when things started, moving. And then we started getting, like other support slot offers, like, to go out with other bands and stuff.
Right.
Like we're going out with Danzig, and then Pantera, and then Queensryche, and then pretty soon, but like after a year and a half of staying on tour,
right?
We toured for Bloody Kisses for a year and a half. So the record was out for 2.5 years, and then it got certified gold, which was Roadrunner's first gold record, and it was a big deal. It was a big deal for everybody, but but it was something that really started, innocently enough. There was no agenda. It was just, we were just doing our thing. And then, so now, whatever, 30 years later, for people to cite it as an influence, it's cool. I think it's cool.
Absolutely, man. Well, dude, let's wrap up here with one last question about Patriarchs in Black. Of course, the new album put it on the screen so people know what they're supposed to be buying on July the 19th. It's Visioning. Where should we tell people to go to keep up with the band? Is Bandcamp the best place, or is there another place that's good?
There is a Bandcamp page. The most active thing for us is Instagram.
Okay.
And so anything that comes up, like, any kind of links available to, like, for instance, for like, when it comes out on vinyl, like, for physical, copies of the stuff, like all the links to outlets to get that stuff will be on the Instagram page.
All right. And
the Instagram page is very current.
Okay.
So when it does become available, like, on Bandcamp or like other, platforms.
Sure.
Excellent. Everything will be on the band's Instagram page.
All right, and it's just at Patriarchs in Black. Is that?
Yes. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. I'm not really good with the social media stuff, I have to admit.
It's called Do the Search. The search and find it yourself. Yeah. There it is, but it's there. Well, one more time, the album is the album is Visioning. The band is Patriarchs in Black. It's out on July 19th. You can catch Johnny in that band on that record. You can catch him pretty much every weekend somewhere. I know I'm going to be catching him here in about 3 weeks when you guys are here with Quiet Riot in Northfield, Ohio. I will be seeing you there.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So so it is Patriarchs in Black, though. The album kicks ass. It's called Visioning. Make sure you listen to it. Make sure you buy something, people. Don't just stream it. That's lame. Buy something to help.
It's a pretty cool record. I think, like, I was telling Dan, like, as the record was starting to, as the songs were starting to get, further developed. Mm-hmm. I was like, like the songwriting has gotten stronger.
Oh yeah.
And I think that was like, I think that's the thing that helps, like, helps this record, like, take a step up. Like, Dan's, he's very passive about his songwriting. Like, he just does this because he loves doing it.
Sure.
And he just thinks that he's just putting riffs together or whatever. And I was like, no, dude, the songwriting is definitely stronger on this record. And it's, like the reviews on this record so far have been really strong. And I think that's a testament to Dan, really, coming up with some, really strong songwriting on this one.
I think it might have something to do with the other half of the band as well, man, because you're playing kicks ass.
Yeah, I'm like, I always like to be the weakest link in the chain with wherever I'm working, because I always, it makes me work harder that way,
right.
And, but I really don't, like I was thinking about that recently. I was like, like on paper, my career is pretty impressive.
Sure.
it's like, wow, like, I play with a lot of cool people, done a lot of cool things. And I was like, and I just look at myself and I'm like, like I hear what I'm doing, like, when it comes back. And to me, it feels like, it feels very, middle of the road to me. It's just like, it's very basic stuff.
Wow. That would be only you that sees your career that way, my friend. I mean,
no, but like on paper, yeah, it's like, on paper, like, if you, whatever, put a resume together, you'd be like, wow, I've played with a lot of cool people,
sure.
Done some really cool gigs. And it's like, it's purely on my personality.
Right. Very cool, man. Well, let's wrap it up here, man. One more time. Visioning is the album. Patriarchs in Black is the band. July 19th is the date.
Yes.
Make sure you get it. And Johnny, just want to say one more time, man, thanks for joining me here on Chris Akin Presents.
Thanks for having me back.
Like a lesson. If the 20 years of settling, that's rebirth. But to fight the death, the devil bring a last. Shall be first, kids a curse, course a leveling extremity. Rock 'em, check the melody. Alongside, Pantheon, time and space. Back from the rubble, brought a casket and shovel, putting naysayers in their place. Back on board. Alongside, Pantheon, time and space. Back from the rubble, brought a casket and shovel, putting naysayers in their place.
The biggest and the best heavy metal radio station is CMS Network Now. With over 5,000 heavy metal songs from all the subgenres and eras of metal, it ranges far more than almost any station broadcasting today. You can also listen to great radio shows like Charlie Kendall's Metal Shop, the shows of the CMS Network, and even the full episodes of the Classic Metal Show with the music. Visit CMS Network now at www.cmsradio.net or on the CMS Network app in both the iOS or Android stores. There's no need to listen anywhere else for the best heavy